Just started.
Okay, good morning, everybody, to Contemporary Issues class on a beautiful, warm November morning again. We are going to talk today about nuclear power. Ron is going to tell us about new things in nuclear power. It's a different world than it used to be. The old ideas don't completely apply. So this will be interesting to hear about. Before we start, I want to welcome our Zoomers and ask you to mute on the lower left side of your screen there so we can keep the background noise down. And we are recording this for future playback. And as I like to sometimes say, we encourage questions, but please don't badger our speaker and disagree in a disagreeable way. Sometimes folks get very testy when we disagree with the speaker too much. So if you want to do that, save that for maybe after the class, if you want to do really an extended conversation with the speaker on the topic. So with that, any other announcements? We have a Christmas party coming up on December 12th at the Galloway's house, and we thank them again for hosting. I will send out that announcement again, and we got 20 or so already signed up. Yes, Bob.
I wanted some good news on the way. Grandchild number 4, they're in the hospital. So
Oh, good.
giving birth as we speak. So it's Tyler and Lauren. So it's our 4th grandchild.
Oh.
So prayers and
Yes.
for Tyler and Lauren.
Yeah. It's a special deal. Good. All right. Vicki, would you shut the door? Got some background laughing back there. And yeah.
No laughing allowed.
Have our own laughing in the room will be enough. Anything else in the news anybody want to talk about? Just briefly. I thought the neat story yesterday was the Pfizer COVID pill. It's supposed to be 90% effective, and they're really saying that could be a game changer. You know, as soon as you know that you have COVID, take that, and it keeps almost guaranteed to keep people out of the hospital and only with a very mild case. So it might be just an amazing treatment that people are surprised is so effective.
I've talked to a first responder, and he says that taking the 2 shots and then the booster shot does not keep you from getting COVID.
There are
What
breakthrough
it
cases.
does, it will keep you from dying from
Right.
COVID.
Right. Yep.
Steve, I think what
Sure.
surprised a lot of us is the spiking of cases here in Colorado.
Yes.
And a lot of elective surgeries being delayed now.
Yes.
We're a red state.
When we were doing so well.
Almost all the ICU beds are taken up. It's just it's very strange. Yeah, Dr. Bob, what do you think? Is it surprising to you as a medical doctor?
Maternity ward.
No, she didn't.
Well,
Yeah.
this thing is not over.
Good question.
And the only way to get it over is for people to wear masks. We must wear masks. The vaccines are not 100%.
Yeah.
And we can spread it to each other, those of us who are vaccinated.
Mhm.
And as long as we continue to spread it to each other, we'll continue to get variants which are going to be resistant to the vaccines we have. So the quicker we can reduce the number of cases, the less likely we are to reduce that variant. So I still wear a mask everywhere I go.
Amen.
Amen. Okay.
But you know, if anything, you should wear it because I never got the flu last year. Too.
Yeah.
You have to remember the flu. It knocked me out for like 2 weeks the one year before the COVID.
Well, that's
Like,
because everybody was wearing masks.
Right.
last year.
That's what I mean, wearing the mask, I never got the flu either, you know?
Right.
You did all the good things, didn't you? Exactly.
Yeah. Maybe we'll do a class with Dr. Bob if he'll come back and tell us more about it and kind of update on lots of the new things we've been learning from as time goes on. Yeah. Okay. Okay, with that, let me turn it over to Ron. As you all mostly know Ron, a retired engineer who worked in the Tennessee nuclear plant doing uranium isotope separation. So he knows his stuff on that. So take it
Okay.
away, Ron.
Okay, and with that, I want to, of course, acknowledge that because I worked in uranium enrichment and took a couple classes in nuclear, that doesn't make me the world's expert on the whole spectrum of nuclear technology. And we're going to try this morning to keep it not too terribly technical. We're going to skip into a lot of areas and just look at it on a kind of a broad brush basis. I'm going to pass around something that's not radioactive. This is a nearly pure zirconium tube. This is a tube made of the metal zirconium, and they put these little uranium pellets into it, and this is what goes into a nuclear reactor. Again, this has been certified, not radioactive, not used. This was just manufactured. Actually, this was made, I believe, in Russia, and I also checked it with my own radioactive meter. We can guarantee this is not in any way radioactive.
I believe him.
Okay, well, unfortunately, nuclear kind of came into the world in kind of one of the worst possible ways. Mainly, what brought nuclear into the world next.
Just click on it. You want to go to your next slide?
Yeah.
Yeah, just go. over
Right
there.
click, left click.
No, just go over, look on the screen now.
Okay.
See, and just put the cursor over like that and then just click, left click.
Okay. All right. And we shouldn't joke about it, but nonetheless, I thought that was a pretty good Far Side cartoon.
If you can't read it from back there, it says, I'll tell you what this means, Norm, no size restrictions and screw the fishing limit.
Okay. And unfortunately, this is a picture taken from about 40 miles away of one of the most massive nuclear atmospheric tests of a bomb in the history of the world. And this was, quote, the Romeo nuclear blast, that I think was 11 megatons, yeah. And this was viewed from 40 miles away looking over the ocean. So nuclear did not make it came into the world in a kind of a bad way, but we're going to talk nuclear power. And nuclear power and nuclear weapons are distinct fields. This is a picture of a mine in western Colorado. And this headline, Western Uranium to restart the Sunday Mine Complex down there in, is it Montrose or the county next to it? San Miguel County. Pretty close to where the San Miguel and the Dolores River meet. But you can see some of the uranium ore. It is often yellow, black, or green in color. And they are reopening that mine complex, a Canadian firm. So there are some good signs of a reemergence of nuclear. Okay, we could have certainly a whole lesson on the whole spectrum of how do we get power. But right now, and this is data taken from 2020, natural gas was about 40% of the US grid. So that's the big boy. Nuclear is surprisingly enough in second place at almost 20%, despite the fact we haven't built a new plant in at least 4 decades.
And we're closing existing.
And we're closing quite a few. But it's still holding out with 20%. We can see coal is now down to 20% or just under 20%. I'm stunned there. If you would have told me 15 years ago, the coal would have fallen to 20%, I would have really, my jaw would have dropped.
Is this US or is this worldwide?
This is US.
Okay.
And then good old hydropower is 7%. Wind power has come up to 8.5%. 15 years ago, wind was down there under 2 or 3%. So wind's coming on strong. Hydropower is holding its own. It's too bad we don't have more hydropower, but the simple fact is we built dams in just about all the locations you can. And with the global warming, the water flows are not exactly increasing greatly. So hydropower is peaked out. Nonetheless, it's a nice power source. There's the My mouse on a wheel, source of power, if you get enough of those under your hood. And then, of course, does anybody recognize the picture in the lower right-hand corner? What movie is that?
Oh, sure. Back to the future.
Yeah, that's where Doc comes up and he pours that empty beer can residue into his DeLorean. And so that was a classic movie scene of power sources. Okay, so the nuclear renaissance has commenced. This article talks about, these are 3 Polish officials who are working with the company NuScale to start looking at a modular nuclear reactor complex for Poland. Poland right now, of course, is very coal dominated. We could read the fine print. I think it says 79% of electricity in Poland comes from dirty coal. Right.
So Ron, do you happen to know off the top of your head what the comparison between coal and natural gas is as far as emissions are concerned?
In terms of percentage,
Yeah, no, emissions. How much worse? is
coal, I don't know. I can't quote the quantitative numbers. Coal is significantly worse, but natural gas produces far less of the nitrogen oxides and the sulfur compounds and the particulates. It's way better there, but it still contributes large amounts of CO2. So it's least worst. Yeah, less worse. Okay. For those that are in science, you've heard of fission and fusion. Fission is nuclear fission is what the current nuclear reactors are based on. And fusion is being worked on. They're making progress. You'll probably see a lot of news reports about new and better progress that's being made on fusion, but fusion is not producing any power right now. When I worked in Oak Ridge in 1950, there was a guy on my street that was strictly working on fusion. And he said, Ron, right now, he said, this was 40 years ago, he said, in the fusion community, he said, it's about split. He said, there's maybe a third of us that think it's not going to make it in the next 100 years. There's another third that think, well, maybe in 50 years, and another third that are optimistic and thinking, well, maybe we'll get there in 30 or 40 years. Fusion is not there yet. There's a picture of a famous tokamak, you'll hear that word, and that is a toroidal cell where they tried to get a fusion reaction going. And there's some diagrams. Powerful magnetic fields are one way of trying to contain the beam and try to get fusion to occur. Right. Okay, we're gonna blow you away with a little science right now. Essentially, all the power on the Earth comes from fusion from the sun. Fusion is going on right now in the sun. The light from the sun left there about 8 minutes ago. But fusion is what drives the solar system energy. The fusion of hydrogen inside the sun into helium produces enormous amounts of not electricity, but energy that's released. And our lives depend on a giant fusion reactor there on the sun. There are some temperatures of the sun. The surface is immeasurably cooler than the interior of the sun. The surface of the sun is a very comfortable 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit, whereas the interior core of the sun, where the fusion reaction is going on, is up there at 10 to 22 million degrees. So, this is the nuclear binding energy of the elements. This is down here, starting with the very lightest element, which is hydrogen. The next one up is helium. You move your way all the way up until you get to uranium. But basically, the magic place on the nuclear binding energy, that's the amount of energy on the average for each proton in the nucleus. It continues to increase on the periodic table until you get to iron, the nuclear binding energy, and that starts to fall off. What that means is, if you're gonna have fusion, you gotta use the elements that are lighter than iron. And practically speaking, the whole universe exists using the little guys, helium, hydrogen, the 1, 2, and 3 atomic numbers. And then for fission, you want to operate with really, really heavy stable elements like uranium. So again, you can get fission from these guys, from the heavy elements, and you can get fusion from the light elements. All right. 2 approaches to fusion. There's magnetic confinement, which is the one that's been used most, and certainly for the longest period of time, more than 50, 60 years. People have been building these magnetic tokamak confinement containers. And then there's the inertial confinement, where they use powerful and brief pulses of lasers to compress the fuel and start fusion. They talk about the gain in fusion. That's how much energy you put into your test setup versus how much you get out. And they say to make fusion practical economically, you want to get a gain of about 100. You want to be able to get 100 times more energy out of it than you put into it. And right now, there's a couple fusion experiments that have gotten up to 0.7. That means you put in 10 units of energy and you get out 7. But that's only for really, really small periods of time. So we're not terribly close. Nonetheless, the number keeps moving up, and there's a hope. There's an experiment going on right now, and a new one being built that hopes to get a gain, I think, of maybe 10 in the late 2030s. So fusion is not right around the corner. Some of the most optimistic fusion articles say maybe we'll get this little experiment to work in the late 30s, and maybe by 2060 we could get maybe 1% of our energy demand for fusion. So let's keep working on fusion, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen in most of our lifetimes here in this room. Okay, going back to nuclear fuel, of course, this is fission now. Nuclear fuel comes originally from uranium. You got to go into the ground to get it. You got to dig it out, mine it out, and then you got to go through several steps. You need to take the uranium ore and drill it, mine it, typically convert it to uranium hexafluoride, run fluoride gas over it, bring it into a gaseous phase, and then enrich it. That means getting the lighter isotope, which is 235, enriched to a higher number. For commercial power, you want to get it enriched up to 3 to 5% typically. For nasty uses, bombs and stuff, you want to get the number way up there to, big numbers. I don't know what the 70, 80%, that kind of stuff. But this is a cycle. So you got to get it enriched. You got to fabricate it into fuel pellets. You got to put it in a reactor. After it's spent, you need to reprocess it and then store any nuclear waste. There's a lot of books, there's a lot of technology, and I spent a good part of my career in the enrichment industry.
May I ask a question?
Go ahead.
The waste, what is being done with the waste? Because I've heard that you can't just store it in barrels and throw it in the ocean, and you can't do any of those kinds of things that have been done in the past. But what you can do is bury it somewhere. And I come from a part of Nebraska that had a huge split up in northern Nebraska, where one community wanted to have the low grade, which is primarily, I think, for radiation purposes for cancers and stuff. And the other one was violently against it because it would get into the groundwater.
Got it.
And so where do we put the waste?
Okay, the answer is the world's looking for different solutions. There's one nuclear storage place down in New Mexico. They've got an old salt mine kind of hollowed out. and they're putting a lot of the nuclear waste there. If we look around the world, places like France and some other places have selected very geologically stable places to build a nuclear waste repository. I've got a lesson I can give on Yucca Mountain. I gave a master's degree presentation on the Yucca Mountain storage facility. That's out in Nevada. And it's a political football right now.
Oh, it is, it is.
Billions have been put into it in terms of developing it, but they're not actively putting fuel there. But that's another subject, and it's certainly worth.
It
more
split these two
attention.
towns. It split these two towns. They hate each other.
Got it.
The answer to your question right now is a lot of it is getting stored on site at the reactors in great big concrete flasks,
Mhm.
containers, because they can't take it to Yucca Mountain. That was the plan.
Right.
Or New Mexico, they can't take a lot of it. So,
You mentioned France, and France is one of the leading countries for nuclear power.
I'd say
I
the
don't-
leading, yeah,
And I don't know what the percentage is for nuclear power versus.
70 or
coal.
80%.
And so they are doing something with their waste.
Mhm. Yeah, they've got a underground storage place in, I think, southern France.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right. All right. Jumping back to the nuclear cycle, we of course have to mine ore. This is a picture of some of the richest ore that ever came out of one of the mines there on the Colorado Plateau, San Juan County, Utah, around Moab. And the Mia Vita mine of Charlie Sheen there, who lived in Moab, and his house is still there. But this is a sample of uranium from the Ike Nixon mine, and a sample of some of the richest ore that ever came out of that mine. I've got a piece of it in my collection, by the way. Handled safely, I might add, not in my house. All right.
Keeps it in a shed behind his
Yeah.
house.
Okay.
Encased in lead, right?
It's a tough shed, don't worry about it.
It makes its own light at night.
Okay, so,
Guys, I have to interrupt. I'm sorry. I'm
go
just,
ahead.
she just gave birth.
Oh, is everything fine? Is all well?
With Ivy Alexander.
Is he all well?
Congratulations.
Congrats.
Fourth grandchild, yeah.
Oh, that's great, Bob.
So all is well then, good, good.
Sorry, but I had.
Okay. Okay, getting back to uranium, once you've got the uranium, again, they hit it with fluoride gas. There's a complex picture of the chemical process. They are reopening a uranium hexafluoride plant in Metropolis, Illinois. No, that's not where Superman lives. And they're going to be reopening that. I also picked out of the news that Cameco is going to restart production at its Port Hope UF6 plant there at the Blind River refinery in Canada. So things are happening now to restart the UF6 plant and some of the enrichment plants and the mining. The world is starting to say, I think we're going to see a resurgence. Again, I worked at the Portsmouth Uranium Gaseous Diffusion Plant for 3 years, and then 7 or 8 years in the Oak Ridge facility. The Portsmouth plant used the gaseous diffusion process to separate the isotopes. Again, the U-235 is only 0.7% of natural uranium. The vast majority of it is U-238. There's a little bit of 239, 235. But I worked for about 8 years on the high-speed gas centrifuge project. These are several stories high, spun at phenomenally high velocities. And I had the fun. It was one of the best jobs I've ever had, designing the gas handling system to control the flow of uranium hexafluoride to and from and in and out of these high-speed gas centrifuges. I love that work. It was fantastic. Okay, again, a nuclear fuel pellet, and it was mentioned, one little nuclear fuel pellet, and you can see how small they are. They'll fit inside that little tube. Remember the Smarties candy? I think we had as kids. Well, they're smaller than that, but one little nuclear fuel pellet, it says, has as much energy in it as 17,000, I can't read the fine print even, cubic feet of natural gas. Wow, that's quite a, or barrels of oil, about 150 gallons of oil, or ton of coal. So, yeah, in terms of energy density content, uranium's gotta be tremendous amount of energy, and just a little bit. Okay, to actually produce the energy, what do? We create fission. What is fission? You fire a neutron into a U-235 atom. If it strikes it properly, it will split atom splitting. Once the uranium atom splits, it'll split into a couple fission products, a couple lighter elements, and throw off typically 2, 3, 4 neutrons. Now, these are what they call fast neutrons. Once you hit the atom and smash it, these neutrons go flying out at really, really high velocities. Of course, even regular neutrons aren't slow, but these are called fast neutrons. And to get another fission reaction going, you want to slow down those guys, convert them from fast neutrons to slower neutrons, or thermal neutrons. So you want to put the neutrons, allow them to go through what they call a moderator. Think of a moderator as a slower downer. A police man putting a sign, slow down, guys, don't go so fast. So how do you get them slowed down? Put them through a moderator. And the most common water or moderator is water. Good old water will slow down neutrons. And you probably heard of in World War II of the heavy water. Heavy water is even, I think, a better moderator. So a good moderator will slow down neutrons, but not absorb them.
I have a really, really dumb question.
No questions are dumb.
Uranium is a physical thing that you can see.
It's an element.
It's an,
You can see it with a electron microscope.
okay, but it's what you get out of the earth, right? Uranium.
Yes,
Okay,
uranium is one of the
So,
elements.
but the action that when you say it gets smashed and it flies out, that's not something you can see. It's the energy that comes out of it, or is it actually something
Okay.
you can see?
There's two ways uranium will fission. Number one, it naturally decays. In other words, even a piece sitting on the table, a small amount of it over time breaks down and releases neutrons. You can also make it happen by collecting it together in a concentrated form where enough of them are releasing neutrons so that you will get fission to self-propagate and keep going.
But the fission is, you can't see that physically. That's just it's just
You can measure it,
action.
you can see the thermal effects, but you
Okay.
can't physically see
Okay,
it.
okay, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so there we have the fast neutrons going through the water and slowing down and able to fission. Here's probably the most technical chart I've got in here. This shows is that the absorption cross section? Yeah, of elements for different speeds of neutrons. And you can see the really high speed neutrons don't produce fission very well. Okay, now let's talk about nuclear reactors. Well, what are they really? So really, it's a bunch of these tubes a tube I've passed around with the nuclear pellets in them that have been enriched up to a higher number. And you collect a whole bunch of them together so that they can interact with each other. You get a critical mass together close enough enough uranium atoms with high enough 235 content together, and they can, if you get enough of them together and close enough, with a moderator around, they can start creating what we call a critical reaction. It sustains itself. And in a nuclear reactor, that's exactly what you want to do. And as fission occurs, what does it do? The fuel pellets get hot as they undergo fission. And so if they were just left there, they would get super hot and melt down. But you run typically water past them and absorb the heat. You run the water into a steam generator and then run the steam over to a turbine, turn electrical generators, bingo. You've got yourself electricity. You of course could do the same thing with coal or natural gas. You're basically, in that case, you're burning it. In this case, instead of burning it by combustion process, you are allowing a nuclear reaction to take place, which burns the U-235, not exactly, burn is a bad word, splits the atoms. So it's a question of where you get the energy, by splitting an atom or by burning a molecule of carbon. So there we have it. There's a diagram of a typical boiling water or pressurized water reactor system. And you can see the different elements. You have the center core where you pump the water through, and then you take it out to the outside heat exchangers. And you can see where the current designs have a fair number of integrated parts that are separated. And you got to be careful, because if you get a pipe break on one of them, you can lose the coolant. And when you lose the coolant, you can overheat and bad things can happen.
Ron,
Melt the tubes. Yeah.
Is that what happened in Japan
That's what
years
it is.
ago and in 3 Mile Island? They lost the coolant and then it was gonna burn down to groundwater and explode?
Well, wouldn't go burn down the groundwater and explode, but it would certainly throw highly contaminated nuclear waste, potentially scatter them. In Fukushima, it did. We want to quickly jump to the next slide. A quick note on we have a very nuclear Navy, by the way. Most of our aircraft carriers right now, maybe all of them, and certainly our submarine fleet is heavily nuclear. So it's very much a nuclear Navy. In fact, here's something. This is one of 3 of the Navy's Seawolf class nuclear attack submarines, and this happened October 7th. Good golly. They ran into something in the South China Sea, and you could see it did excuse my English, a hell of a lot of damage to that sub.
The media story said an underwater mountain.
Okay.
That's what I read.
Do we
Yeah.
know for sure?
I don't know. But, okay, but jumping back, one of the key things we know about fission, and this, if you get nothing else out of this, sometimes when you fire a neutron, hopefully a thermal neutron, a slower one, into a U-235 atom, and you get fission, you get most of the neutrons flying out immediately, but not all of them. There's something they call delayed neutrons. This is incredibly important. Some of the atoms sit around and kind of for days, even weeks, and then finally let go. These are called delayed neutrons. And this means you can irradiate something, get the instantaneous fission going, pull the heat from that, and then walk away and say, well, the reaction's over. No, it's not. It's going to release these delayed neutrons for the next couple weeks and a month, for quite a while, before it finally stops throwing off neutrons. And this is these are called delayed neutrons and delayed heat. And you've got to make sure that you keep the thing cool for a couple of months, practically speaking, after the reactor shuts down. And that's what went wrong with Fukushima. Most of the current design reactors require you to keep the coolant water going for a month or 2 months, 3 months after you've shut down the reactor. And in Fukushima, they lost the electrical grid and they lost the electrical power, so they could not keep the coolant water going. And they got burned hours later, days later, when the pumps could not keep coolant going.
Because our standby generators were built next to the seawall. And the tsunami came in and inundated the generators, the standby generators.
Right.
Was just poor design. Nobody should have put in generators where they put them.
Just a time check for you, Ron. It's
Yeah.
11:05. I know you want to
Okay.
tell about the new
Yeah,
types.
I better move fast. Okay, so we could talk about the Chernobyl disaster was, there's been 2 what they call class 7 nuclear disasters. And that, the worst was Chernobyl, and the second one was Fukushima. Okay, let's try to move along and get into some of the new ones. 3 Mile Island was not that bad of an incident on a relative scale. Let's get to the new technology, the cavalry coming over the hill. Okay, and the thing is, the new technology is going to have fault tolerant natural convection cooling. So you don't need pumps. It's got a design, so it just kind of boils itself and stays cool by itself without having external electrical. It could be economically competitive, small sizes. And there's a picture of one. This particular one by NuScale is about 60 feet high, but it also contains almost all the nuclear components inside one pressure vessel. Unlike that earlier diagram that showed different pieces with pipes running out to them. Here it's almost all contained, uses natural convection for the cooling. You don't need powered pumps. Well, that's huge. It'll basically do the same thing though. Create steam, which goes over to generators. There's another, let's see, I went too far. There's another design. Okay, by the way, they are gonna put one of these new small nuclear reactors up at Eielson Air Force Base in Alaska, which currently burns 800 tons of coal a day in their own coal-fired power plant. So this one's going in there in 2027, I think, to bring it online, which is not too far away. Okay. Let's see, we get back to molten salt. Oh, yeah. Jumped ahead. One of the nice things about the natural convection is it also has a fail-safe system. You can do these reactors in small modules of about 50 megawatts of electricity each. Most of the plants now are 300, 400, 500 megawatts. With these small reactors, it's like batteries. You can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 to 12, and scale it up as the demand grows. So here's a 1 to 12 module design. The key factor again is the fact that it's naturally convection cooled and it's naturally contained in that big fat boy cylinder. That really cranks up the safety. It also has a decay heat removal system. It doesn't depend on external electrical power systems. We'll go in and it turns out it's also kind of sitting in a swimming pool. So if things go wrong and you scram it, you shut down the reactor, it'll stay with water for 30 days, cool down, and then finally within 30 days or something, air cooling is good enough for it. So it's much, much safer. Bill Gates is working on another concept with a firm called TerraPower. This natrium plant is going to be built somewhere in Wyoming. There's 4 sites they're looking at. I don't know which one will win, but this has even got more technology in it. This one's going to have use molten salt as a reactor coolant. And we want to mention molten salt a little bit. Right now in solar, this is a facility that actually exists right out there in Nevada right now. Look at that big dome with the like the lid on the top of it, that white cap. They've got a giant array of solar panels, all aiming that directed solar energy to the Tower of Power. It was a good rock group, by the way. But the Tower of Power is filled with molten salt, and they can heat it up to 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. The salt won't turn to steam. And then they run the liquid salt over to a heat exchanger, and from that get electrical power. But you can also store your energy in this molten salt. The fact that you can crank it up to 1200 degrees Fahrenheit or something like that, and keep it in a thermos bottle. And then when you want heat, you just open your thermos bottle of molten salt. Don't touch it to your lips. 1200 degrees is too hot. But generate electricity. So molten salt is a good way to store power.
Is that considered nuclear power?
No,
Okay.
no.
It's solar, no uranium's used, it's solar and salt?
Solar and salt. All I'm saying is molten salt is a medium, a liquid medium that can be used by different energy types.
Uh-huh,
You could certainly heat up molten salt with coal. You
yeah,
could heat it up with solar power.
okay.
That's sort of your
Wind
that's
power,
sort of your
okay.
battery.
Yeah, it's a battery.
Wow.
So these molten salt batteries are coming on. It says here, the system relies on a mix of molten sodium potassium salts heated to a little over 1000 degrees to transfer the heat. And again, this is something that's been,
How does it generate power though?
okay, you take the heat out, you run the molten salt through a heat exchanger where there's water going through. You turn the water to steam.
Okay.
There's a diagram.
Wow.
Yeah, that diagram shows the solar arrays heating the molten salt container, running the liquid molten salt through into the storage bins, and then running them through.
What's the
Heaps.
downside of that technology?
Expense. It's the economics of it that you've got to really prove.
Okay,
And again, there's a nuclear reactor with molten salt. They're also looking in the nuclear world at actually mixing the uranium into the molten salt. So instead of having fuel rods in the nuclear reactor, you've just got molten salt with some uranium in it that's circulating around. Okay, we're going to wrap it up here. Nuclear waste. This chart shows the many fissile byproducts of nuclear energy and how long they last. And that's this, what's that scale? 10 to the 7th. Some of the things have to be taken care of for more than a million years. This shows, though, one of the ways they're using to store nuclear waste. They're putting it into glass, borosilicate glass, from the first waste vitrification plant in the UK in the 60s. It says this block contains material chemically identical to high-level waste. And it says a piece this size from modern vitrification plants, it's a glass plant, contain the total high-level waste from nuclear electricity for one person through their lifetime. So if a nuclear power plant provided you personally with all the energy you would need for your lifetime, you could store all the nuclear waste in a large Oreo cookie about the size of a piece of glass. And then I of course mentioned Yucca Mountain. Well, I've yacked a lot and I can't touch on every, aspect of nuclear today, but it does look like, to my surprise, it's now gonna maybe making a comeback. Someone pointed out that wherever they're holding the big conference now of the national leaders on the energy issues and global emissions, that they say the energy for that meeting is coming basically from nuclear power plants. And the world is starting to, a lot of us tree huggers, very much environmentalists, are starting to say, nuclear power got pushed back too quick, too fast. Now as we realize how bad coal really is, nuclear is starting to look better and better.
Wouldn't you agree that it happened at 3 Mile Island and then it went down after that? That's just my age as I'm remembering, all of a sudden then nuclear wasn't talked about.
Yeah, I was in Oak Ridge when 3 Mile Island happened, and I can remember my fellow engineer Charlie Lyles came up. He had heard the news and he said, "Ron, this is bad for us."
Yep.
And it did. Ultimately, the gas centrifuge project was canceled a few years later, largely because the demand curve for enriched uranium plummeted.
Right,
They didn't need our centrifuges.
right.
There is a centrifuge plant, by the way, operating in New Mexico that is owned by the European consortium, Urenco. But that ended the project.
It did.
And I can remember sitting in the room announcing what they were going to do, and said, "We've decided to terminate the gas centrifuge project today."
That was it. And it
All of
wasn't.
those engineers were sitting around, oh.
No, could 3 Mile Island be refurbished to start up again?
I believe 3 Mile Island is, I think it's still running.
Is it?
Yeah.
See, that's a
It
misconception.
wasn't a massive meltdown that destroyed the,
But that's a misconception
Yeah.
that happened to the nuclear.
right,
Right.
right.
Can we go back to the beginning? What does enriched uranium mean? Why do they have to do that?
Enrich, it
You
simply
said enrichment.
means increasing the concentration of the desirable isotope, which is 235,
By what? And by what process?
by either centrifuge or gaseous diffusion, or there are some other techniques.
I can't remember the name of it, but what happened to the Colorado Public Service Company's thing? That was, that just was.
Fort St. Vrain,
Yeah.
helium-cooled nuclear reactor, that operated for over a decade up there near Lyons, not
It
too
never
far.
operated efficiently or properly.
Yeah, it was helium-cooled. They did find it was tough to contain helium for a long period of time without leaking a lot of it, but they didn't have any nuclear accidents up there.
But they never made any money on it, probably.
Economics,
Yeah.
economics. That's really what's killing coal. Gladly killing coal right now. Is it's not economically competitive.
Bring back the coal jobs.
Yeah.
Bring back the
Oh, my
industry.
gosh.
But
Well-
there's a real environmental issue here. I remember 15 years ago, our chairman was saying demand for uranium is gonna go up because China is building reactors like crazy. All of a sudden, China stopped building reactors and went to coal.
Yeah, there's like 500 more that are being built in the next year or two in China. How can we control that? We
Coals.
can't. Yeah,
Coal
coal.
power.
How can we control that? We can't. I don't know what's gonna happen there.
Yeah. They are the biggest CO2 producer in the world.
Yep.
And they do have coal power plants on the boards. However, they also have a vigorous nuclear program, and they are working on wind and solar, but how much, how fast, that's,
Rob, is the major advantage of fusion over fission just their waste product?
yeah, that and the fact that you don't need to go mine
Yeah.
uranium.
All you need is hydrogen.
All you need is some hydrogen, yeah.
I remember back in the sixties, we would listen to KOMA radio out of Oklahoma City. And every night we would get, and it was a music station. And every night we would have the strontium and barium levels every night. And they would tell us. And what it was doing, it was going into the grass, and then the cows would eat the grass and would go through the milk. And that's when we finally got the underground testing going instead of the atmospheric testing.
Yeah,
I don't know if any of you remember that type of thing.
I would recommend the book Nuclear Frenzy. You'll see it in the bookstores in Moab. But it's worth reading, and it talks about a lot of the above ground nuclear tests done in Nevada
Uh-huh.
and places like St. George, Utah, some of the sheep herds out there.
Oh, yes,
Yeah, so
I've heard about the sheep.
some pretty nasty stuff happened out there.
Because of the fear factor. Political question. Is nuclear energy the silent partner or the covert companion in this whole matter of combating climate change? Electricity, wind, solar get the headlines. But from your vantage point, Ron, what you know and hear, is the silent partner that countries are working on nuclear as the one that's going to really save the day, big time? Any reaction to that?
I'm thrilled when I see the rise of wind and all the wind vanes you see out there in eastern Colorado and Kansas as you drive out. It makes my heart thrill to see it. However,
Windmills.
windmills, yeah, and the solar farms that you see. And we need to do everything we can, but there's very, very serious concerns that those two sources can fill that massive demand.
Once the coal goes down.
Yeah. once the
And
coal
look at
goes
what
down.
happened in Texas last winter.
Yeah.
Now, I've heard that, and my brother lives in Oklahoma, that almost the whole panhandle of Oklahoma will be windmills.
Really?
It comes off the mountain, see, with such a gust that
The
it
wind
will,
never stops in Oklahoma.
yeah.
Yeah.
the whole
Yeah, the wind is
panhandle,
always blowing in Oklahoma. always.
right.
Yeah.
Anything off along the mountain range.
Bob,
How about the concentration of uranium occurring in Iran?
Iran has a nuclear program going on. They have gas centrifuges. They basically have a design they semi-stole from Belgium and the Netherlands. And they're using, the big question is, we think they're taking the enrichment level well above, or want to take it well above the level needed for commercial power. If uranium is just at 3 to 5%, which is quite good enough for commercial power sources. But if the nasty boys take it up to 90%, 95%, it could then be used for a uranium bomb.
I
So the
don't
big
think,
concern is they're taking it up to the high levels.
my hypothesis is that they won't attack us. They'll attack Israel.
Oh, yeah.
That's the first one.
Yeah.
And then it'll just spread.
Well, or some nefarious people will get their hands on it
Right.
because it's not secure.
Right.
That's my fear. Yeah.
We've got 5 minutes left.
Ron?
Yeah.
A question about power consumption on that side.
Mm.
Now, it's interesting, the Department of Energy said that 75% of the power being consumed is from devices turned off. And that we're such a large energy company, producer, consumers. And all this energy is being consumed when we're not using it, and so we, like you said, we need nuclear, we need all these dangerous things. And I wonder, is it being looked into at all with even technologies? Have you heard of anything like that to turn these devices off? You know what I mean? So we're not consuming power when we don't need it.
I just came from Nebraska a couple days ago. I'm gonna be here for a month.
Yeah.
I unplugged it.
No, I know.
That is 30% of my electricity.
Well, that's what I'm saying,
Yeah.
but I'm wondering if.
Just unplug it. You can unplug it overnight.
Your television?
Yeah, the whole box and everything, you just unplug everything.
But Ron,
You
you
can
know
save
anything
your
about that?
30% on your electric bill.
Instead of
Well,
us having to manually unplug it, you know, which is a good thing.
I'd have to do more research on what the passive device consumption is.
Yeah. how- that
What's
was
this
another number I should
better
come up with.
plugging thing?
Yeah, but it's huge.
He
Well,
said,
you see,
Tom
your
said-
plug-in is attached to your TV and the modem box, the cable box and all. And if you unplug it, if you leave it plugged in, it's taking energy all the time. But if you unplug it, say at 9 o'clock at night when you go to bed, plug it in the morning, you do that for a whole month, you'll see a reduction in your electric bill.
Does that include like a stereo set?
Just about all devices. you
Any
can-
device, it keeps,
Computers?
yeah,
Everything, everything.
It takes- even when you think you've shut it off, it's still taking a small amount of power.
Everything is.
Shut up.
Wow.
Everything.
That's inviting.
Huge power consumption with we're not using devices.
I'm just sitting here thinking about, I'm in awe. I'm in awe of the fact that we have a God that created an earth that allows us to be sustainable, whether it be good or bad. I'm just in awe of that. And I'm also in awe of minds like yours, Ron, and yours over there that can understand and help us with this, you know, so thank you for that so much, you know, and I just think it's amazing that our God provided this in his creation so that we could sustain, you know, it's just amazing to me, it just blows my mind away, you know,
Yeah.
so thank you though.
Let's
because-
hear it for the sun. That's
Yeah.
where,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, thank you, Ron.
We got a couple more minutes left. Any more questions? I'll throw one out that I wondered. Ron, I thought natural gas was gonna be the next big thing. We heard that coal was going away, natural gas was coming. Is that not right? Is natural gas dirty and not available? And is nuclear really gonna be the next big thing?
okay. Natural gas looks economical, cheap. It is providing, it was the big boy, 40% of the US electrical grid. Its Achilles heel, though, is the fact that it still produces massive amounts of carbon dioxide.
Why did we go away from the hydrogen powered cars in 2009? All of a sudden, the hydrogen car business just went poof, it was gone.
I want to know what happened to the neighborhood hydrogen power cell. Every subdivision was gonna have their own hydrogen power
Right.
source, and you just went off of that.
All you have to do
And you
is
don't
have-
hear about it anymore.
right, all you
Yeah.
have to do is just change the injectors in your car, and you can have hydrogen, liquid hydrogen that you're gonna have. It looks like a propane tank.
Right.
That's all it is. And
Does
now we
science,
have to go through this billions of dollars and trillions of
does
dollars.
the
Yeah.
science keep changing or is it the economics of it? or-
Although you still need to separate the hydrogen. And you need power to produce the hydrogen. In fact, there's talk of using these small modular reactors to power electrolysis and processes to distill hydrogen out of the air.
Yeah, we heard, I didn't hear the entire story, but this morning on CBS this morning, they had an article about, or a story about lithium batteries in electric cars. And how we all think that's gonna be a great thing, and it's obviously better than burning fossil fuels, but we've still got to collect the lithium from the earth and
it
the
also
water
said there are no
used.
lithium in the United States.
And the water used to, as a, yeah, so, yeah.
Most of
We've
lithium
got
is
to
in
find
Africa,
good-
isn't it?
I think South America, Chile.
There is some in Chile too.
Yeah. I'd have to look for it.
Ron, you know much about the CO2 scrubbing technology that's out there that I've heard? and read?
Yeah, there's talk about it, but the bottom line is after all the years of research, it's not cheap. And still where to store the captured hydrogen, or not hydrogen, but the captured CO2,
Right,
and where to put it.
yeah.
There's concern, okay, you put it in a salt dome underneath the earth. will it stay there or will it seep up and escape?
But God created the perfect CO2 storage system. It's called a tree. So we need to continue to plant trees and stop deforestation.
And the court plans.
That's interesting because while Glasgow was going on, Russia and China did not participate in
Didn't go.
the conference. But they blasted their plan, which was they have these thousands and millions of acres that they can plant trees in. And they said that that is their abatement, their answer to their carbon, whatever you call it.
What happened to the million trees that were supposed to be planted here in the United States? Did that stop? Did that disappear?
I haven't heard of any,
It needs to be all the above, yeah.
they're all
Millions
getting,
of trees were supposed to be planted.
Well, let's do our part. Let's all go out after lunch and plant a tree. And we're about out of time today for a class, not for the earth, we hope, but thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Lord. See you next week.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
Well, I was reading this morning.
Yeah.